Hello, my friends. Elias McCollum here, the Bitterroot Bard, back for another video. Today, I want to do a deep dive and a book review of George MacDonald's book, Phantastes. And it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. If J.R.R. Tolkien was the father of modern fantasy, George MacDonald certainly was the grandfather of modern fantasy. And I can find many connections in this book, where Tolkien took some influence, and C.S. Lewis also took some influence for his books, The Chronicles of Narnia. And they both had made statements that George MacDonald's writings influenced them greatly, specifically this book, Phantastes. And the first connection that I found in it with Tolkien was that the ash tree could take the form of a large tree-like giant, which obviously gave some influence to the Ents in The Lord of the Rings. Also, the beech tree is able to change itself into the form of a beautiful damsel, which right away I see a connection between that and C.S. Lewis' dryads in the Chronicles of Narnia. Now, both these men took influence largely from the mythologies of the world, specifically Norse and Greek mythology and Anglo-Saxon culture. C.S. Lewis largely Greek mythology, Tolkien largely Norse mythology and Germanic mythology. But they both stated that this book, Phantastes, had a great influence on their works. The main character in Phantastes enters fairy by the power of a fairy woman, which he finds in a compartment of his desk. Now, what does that give you an idea of? Well, of course, C.S. Lewis's magical wardrobe that the Pevensey children entered the land of Narnia through. So that was the first thing in the book. And then next, so this fairy woman, she told the main character, which is never named because it's written in a first person point of view. But she tells the main character that he's going to enter the land of fairy and have an adventure. And the next morning, the gentleman wakes up and he finds his wash basin overflowing with water and running in a stream over his carpet, which becomes a stream in the land of fairy, which he follows into the land of fairy. So when I first read that, I felt a connection to the magical picture which Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace enter Narnia through. Remember the picture in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader? It was a picture of a ship on the sea. And the Pevensey children specifically commented that the ship was very Narnian looking. And of course we know that picture overflowed with water and they were dragged into the land of Narnia through the ocean. So that's very similar to what happened in George MacDonald's Phantastes with this man that entered the land of fairy. So that my next point I want to make is that MacDonald uses imagery in his story to portray a moral Christian message. In the book Phantastes, we find the main character through continual disobedience. So he's given continual warnings in his journey throughout the land of Faerie to watch out for this, watch out for that, don't go here, don't go there, sort of thing. And he disobeys every time because his curiosity gets the best of him. Which, of course, the disobedience is like sin. And it is sin. Disobedience to the laws of nature, the laws of God, is sin. And so through this sin and through this disobedience, he opens a door to his shadow. and this shadow attaches itself to him, basically follows him around through the whole story. And it's not a natural shadow, but it's just a shadow that's there all the time, regardless of the amount of sunlight or the dimness of the sky. That shadow is always there with him, constantly. And it kind of corrupts his view of beauty. He sees all these things that should be beautiful, but he sees them in a sort of a corrupt and an ugly way. They don't appear as beautiful to him as they would have otherwise had that shadow not attached itself to him. And of course, that shadow represents the dark, selfish nature of man. When we live for ourselves, we get quite ugly. When things are not going our way, they don't look so, things in our environment does not look so beautiful to us. So this shadow constantly follows this man around through his journey, and the ultimate goal that he has is to somehow get rid of his shadow, which in the end we find, I don't want to spoil anything, but in the end it gets resolved through basically his death and him being reborn, which represents the new birth through Jesus Christ. So that's the first moral lesson in the book that we find. MacDonald also explores the themes of humility and love. And I just want to read you a few passages that are so good about humility and love in this story. And we find on page 314 of Phantastes just an awesome passage, an awesome message of what true humility is, and how it really, a man becomes a man through humility rather than through pride. It's a great lesson here. It says, "But it was ill waking in my heavy armor, and besides I had now no right to the golden spurs and the resplendent mail, fitly doled with long neglect. I might do for a squire, but I honored knighthood too highly to call myself any longer one of the noble brotherhood. I stripped off all my armor, piled it under the tree just where the lady had been seated, and took my unknown way, eastward through the woods. Of all my weapons I carried only a short axe in my hand. Then first I knew the delight of being lowly, of saying to myself, I am what I am, nothing more. I have failed, I said, I have lost myself. Would it had been my shadow. I looked round. The shadow was nowhere to be seen. Ere long I learned that it was not myself, but only my shadow, that I had lost. I learned that it is better 1,000-fold for a proud man to fall and be humbled than to hold up his head in his pride and fancied innocence. I learned that he that will be a hero will barely be a man, that he that will be nothing but a doer of his work is sure of manhood. In nothing was my ideal lowered or dimmed or grown less precious. I only saw it too plainly to set myself for a moment beside it. Isn't that an awesome portrayal of what true humility is and what it accomplishes in a man's life? and a woman's life, I might add. But that's how we enter the kingdom of God, is by humility. We humble ourselves as a little child, and we allow ourselves to be taught and instructed and led into the way of life and into the way of truly living as a real man or a real woman. And then on page 346 of the story, we read what true love is. And it's just so awesome. This is stuff, it's not just a fairy tale, but we really get real life lessons from this. And this is all stuff that we can apply to our daily lives, in our everyday relationships, in our relationship with our spouses. If you're married, of course. I personally am not married at this time, but this is something we can apply to all of our relationships, including marriage. So here on page 346, it says, "But she could not make me sad. I knew now that it is by loving and not by being loved that one can come nearest the soul of another. Yea, that where two love, it is the loving of each other and not the being loved by each other that originates and perfects and assures their blessedness. I knew that love gives to him that loveth power over any soul beloved, even if that soul know him not, bringing him inwardly close to that spirit, a power that cannot be but for good. For in proportion as selfishness intrudes, the love ceases, and the power of which springs therefrom dies. Yet all love will one day meet with its return. All true love will one day behold its own image in the eyes of the beloved, and be humbly glad. This is possible in the realms of lofty death. Ah, my friends, thought I, how I would tend you and wait upon you and haunt you with my love." Isn't that just awesome? That's what true love is, and that's where we really get fulfillment from life, is when we love others, not with the intent or the expectation of being loved in return, but we love them simply to love them. And that's what Christ did for us. He loved us when we were yet sinners. He died for us. That's what true love is. And anyways, this book, Phantastes, it's fantastic. I highly recommend you read it. It's got a 5-star rating in my opinion. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And I appreciate you all who take the time to watch my videos. And I'll see y'all next time. God bless.